The sound of my body hitting the floor wasn't the worst part. The cranberry sauce splattering across my grandmother's vintage dress wasn't either. It was the silence. 23 people around that Christmas table, and you could hear the candles flicker. No one moved. Not my cousins. Not my uncle, who had his phone out, recording. Not helping. Not my mother. I'm Simona Cunningham. I'm 29 years old, and until that December night, I thought I understood how far a person could fall. But rock bottom, it turns out, has a basement, and it smells like my stepfather's cologne, fresh pine, and the particular cruelty of being invisible in a room full of people who are supposed to see you. Before I get into it, seriously, it helps more than you know. Hit that like button and drop a comment. Where are you watching from? What time is it there? Okay, now let me set the scene. Christmas Eve at the Cunningham Morrison annual gathering. You know the kind. Matching sweaters no one actually wants to wear. Enough food for 40 people even though only 23 showed up. And family tension sitting underneath it all like a splinter you can't dig out. Frank had been my stepfather for 10 years. 10 years of this. That night, he was drinking his special vintage wine since noon. Trader Joe's Merlot poured into a crystal decanter, which felt about right as a metaphor for the man himself. All evening, he kept making these little comments. How I was sitting in premium real estate at the table. How some people earn their place and others just inherit it. My cousin Jennifer kept catching my eye across the table, her expression a question. What is his problem tonight? I didn't have an answer. I just stared at the grandfather clock and waited for the evening to end. It was 7:47 p.m. when the door burst open. Brittany, 2 hours late, designer bags swinging from both wrists, claiming bankruptcy on Instagram just last week. Frank's entire face transformed, like someone had flipped a switch from dim to floodlight. What happened next I've replayed 1,000 times. Frank stood, walked over to where I was sitting, the same seat I'd occupied for 29 years, the one my late father used to call Simona's throne, and announced that his real daughter needed a proper place at the table. I didn't move fast enough for his liking. He grabbed my chair and yanked. I tried to stand, caught the tablecloth, and went down. My hip hit the hardwood. My dress tore. The cranberry sauce flew. And then, nothing. 23 people. And the only sound was my grandmother's tiny gasp, the one she usually saves for incorrect fork placement. Uncle Ted's phone was up, recording. My mother's face had that particular stillness she'd spent a decade perfecting. The expression of a woman who has trained herself to see nothing, hear nothing, say nothing. I pulled myself up. Cranberry sauce on my dress. My grandmother's dress. Frank muttered something about how I should be grateful I was even invited. That's when I saw it. His phone. Unlocked. Face up on the kitchen counter. In my world, corporate compliance. Fraud detection. The careful art of following money, we have a word for that. Opportunity. I left that night with my dignity in tatters and my father's old laptop hidden in my car. Also, photographs. Every message. Every email. Every damning thing on Frank's phone. He thought he'd pushed around a nobody. He was about to learn that sometimes the nobody has been watching the whole time. But to understand why that push undid him, you need to understand the decade that came before it. Frank Morrison entered our lives like a knight in shining armor. If the armor came from Men's Warehouse and the knight drove a leased BMW he couldn't quite afford. My mother had been widowed 2 years. My father, dead at 53 from a heart attack no one saw coming. Frank appeared at our church's widows and widowers group like a wolf at a sheep support group. He zeroed in on my mother faster than Brittany burns through a credit limit. The favoritism started small. Brittany got a new Honda for her 18th birthday. I got a bus pass and a lecture about self-sufficiency. I actually laughed. I thought it was character building. The joke, it turned out, was on me. College was where the shape of things became clear. My father had set up education funds for me before he died. I'd seen the statements as a kid. When I went to access them, depleted. Market volatility. Frank explained. While somehow finding $60,000 for Brittany's art degree at a private college, she dropped out junior year to become an influencer. Her Instagram has 247 followers, half of them bots. My mother transformed during those years. The woman who once ran charity galas, who commanded boardrooms and respect, became Frank's echo. Whatever Frank thinks is best. A pull-string doll with 5 programmed responses. The real theft? The family business my father built from nothing. A logistics company. Small but profitable. Frank convinced my mother to make him CEO while she was still soft with grief. I watched him parade through my father's office, using his golf clubs, sitting in his chair like he'd earned a single second of it. But here's what Frank didn't know: I'd been watching. 3 years into their marriage, I found discrepancies in the company books during a dinner where he'd left his laptop open. 5 years in, I noticed property transfers that didn't make sense. 7 years in, I started keeping copies. Last Thanksgiving, my grandmother pulled me aside in the kitchen, pressed something into my palm. A USB drive. Your father's old laptop, she whispered. The one from the garage. Don't let Frank know you have it. There are things on there, things he should have told you before he died. Then she went back to basting the turkey like she hadn't just handed me a bomb. Christmas night, I sat in my apartment with ice on my hip and fire in my chest. The champagne I'd brought for the family toast sat unopened on the counter. Humiliation. It turns out, pairs better with coffee and rage. I opened my father's laptop. The password was my birthday. My father was brilliant and terrible with passwords. What loaded up made my hands shake. Email archives spanning 15 years. Folders labeled, insurance, will for Simona, and one that made my stomach drop, if something happens. The first discovery hit like ice water. My father's real will, the one never entered into probate, contained specific protections. The business was to be held in trust until I turned 30, with mandatory distributions starting at 25. The house was never meant to be in Frank's name. There were safeguards, provisions, clauses. So where was this will when it mattered? I pulled up Frank's phone photos. Thank God for his narcissism requiring a 15-minute photo shoot with the Christmas ham. His text messages told a story better than any true crime documentary. Brittany owed money to men with names like Big Tony and Vegas Mike. $200,000, maybe more. Frank had been juggling creditors like a circus act. Then I found the mother lode. Messages between Frank and someone named Carl. Restructuring company assets. Moving inventory offshore. Setting up shell companies. Using my father's business as collateral for loans that funded Brittany's lifestyle. In my line of work, we have a word for this, too. Fraud. My phone buzzed. The family WhatsApp group was going nuclear. Uncle Ted's video of my fall was circulating with crying laughing emojis, but the responses weren't what he expected. Cousin Jennifer. Ted. What is wrong with you? Aunt Martha. This is disgusting. My phone rang. Jennifer. She told me something that made everything click. She'd been doing paralegal work for a firm handling foreclosures. She'd seen my mother's house on a preliminary list. Frank had taken out 3 mortgages without telling anyone. The house my father built with his own hands was about to be lost to pay for Brittany's failed boutique, failed food truck, failed everything. I opened my laptop and started typing. Every email I wrote was scheduled to send at 3 a.m. To Frank's business partners, to the IRS tip line, to the state attorney general's office, to Brittany's creditors with Frank's actual financial statements attached, to my mother with the real will. Each email was perfect, professional, devastating. 10 years of compliance training was about to pay off in ways my company never imagined. I included Uncle Ted's video in several of them. Let them see exactly who Frank Morrison really was. I woke at 5:58 a.m. on Christmas morning, 2 minutes before my alarm, made coffee, sat in my father's old reading chair, waited. At 6:23 a.m., Frank's world began to unravel. The first call came from Carl. I could hear Frank's phone ringing through the ceiling. He lived 3 floors up in the same building. Another expense he'd manipulated my mother into covering. Then another ring. Another. By 6:45 a.m., the calls were continuous. I pulled up the family WhatsApp. Frank had typed, "Simona, what did you do?" in all caps at 6:31. At 6:32, he tried to delete it. 17 people had already screenshot it. Uncle Ted suddenly wasn't finding anything funny anymore. His video had made it onto TikTok. 50,000 views. Pause here. If you're enjoying this Karma Christmas special, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment. What's your worst family dinner story? Your support honestly means more than you know. Okay, back to the chaos. Frank's business partners fell first. Carl. Fred, Rick, Andy, Uma, Derek, I swear I'm not making up those names, though the acronym they spell is almost too perfect. Each received detailed documentation of Frank's creative accounting. The IRS tip included 5 years of discrepancies, documented and gift-wrapped. Brittany's creditors got the real treasure, Frank's actual assets, his hidden accounts, proof that he'd been lying about his finances while his daughter skipped payment after payment. Big Tony, it turns out, does not appreciate being played for a fool. My mother's email was different. I included the original will, the real one, plus documentation of every property transfer, every fund withdrawal, every single thing Frank had taken while she grieved. I ended with a simple question: did you know, or did you choose not to know? By 7 o'clock a.m., Frank was at my door, not pounding, not demanding, whimpering. Through the peephole, I watched him in his Christmas pajamas, phone in each hand, both ringing non-stop. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 30 minutes. Then Brittany's voice echoed through the hallway. She was screaming about her credit cards being declined at Starbucks. On Christmas morning, the entitlement was almost impressive. She was threatening to tell everyone about his side business if he didn't fix it immediately. Even I didn't know about a side business. This was getting better than expected. My mother arrived at 7:30, still in her nightgown with a coat thrown over it. The look on her face wasn't anger or sadness. It was awakening, like she'd been sleepwalking for a decade and finally opened her eyes. Frank's phone showed 47 missed calls by 8 a.m. Lawyers, creditors, partners, investigators, even Brittany's art school calling about fraudulent loan applications, each ring a nail in the coffin he'd built himself. The family chat evolved from confusion to commentary. Cousin Jennifer. Karma's working overtime this Christmas. Grandmother. Finally. My mother hadn't spoken online, but she'd been reading every message, seeing every piece of evidence. By 9 o'clock a.m., 3 news vans were outside our building. Uncle Ted's video hadn't just gone viral. Someone had tagged it, "Evil Stepdad Gets Exposed." It was trending. Frank pushing me at dinner played on loop across social media. Each share added another crack to his reputation. 3 days after Christmas, just when I thought Frank was down for the count, he pulled what I call the reverse victim shuffle, a move so audacious I almost admired it. My doorbell rang at 7 a.m., not Frank's desperate knocking. This was professional. The man at my door looked like a lawyer from Central Casting, silver hair, expensive suit, a smile that probably cost more than my car. Richard Steinberg. He handed me papers with the kind of flourish usually reserved for magicians. Frank was suing me for $2 million, corporate espionage, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress. That last one made me laugh out loud, which Richard did not expect. Frank had called in a favor from his golf buddy, the one who cheated at the 9th hole. Richard Steinberg wasn't just any lawyer. He was the guy who'd gotten 3 CEOs off on technicalities. His retainer alone cost more than Frank had, but apparently he was working on contingency, betting on a big payout. The counterattack was clever. Frank claimed I'd used my position in corporate compliance to steal trade secrets, violated confidentiality agreements, maliciously prosecuted him. He'd found 2 former co-workers of mine, Kelly and Marcus, both fired for expense fraud, who were willing to swear I'd bragged about taking down my stepfather. Then Brittany showed up at my door with a camera crew, not news media. She'd hired a documentary filmmaker, a guy named Chad with a YouTube channel, to film her story of being victimized by a jealous stepsister. She stood in my hallway fake crying about how I'd always resented her success, how I'd fabricated evidence, how I was the real villain. The narrative was spreading. Frank had hired a PR firm. Well, actually, it was just some guy named Doug who ran a reputation management service from his mom's basement, but he was surprisingly effective. The hashtag falsely accused started trending. They'd edited Uncle Ted's video to make it look like I'd thrown myself down. The internet, it turns out, loves a conspiracy theory. By day 4, I was getting death threats from strangers who'd decided I was an evil stepdaughter trying to destroy a hard-working family man. My company put me on administrative leave pending investigation. My neighbors started a rumor that I was mentally unstable. Even some family members started questioning. Maybe Frank had a point. Maybe I'd gone too far. The worst moment came when my mother called, doubt creeping into her voice. "Simona," she said quietly, "Frank's lawyer showed me documents. They look real. Did you plant evidence?" The fact that she could even ask that question, after everything, felt like being pushed all over again. Frank went on local morning television, the kind of show that usually covers lost dogs and bake sales. He wore his best suit and his wounded deer expression, talked about raising me like his own daughter, the pain of betrayal, how he just wanted our family back together. The host, who'd clearly never fact-checked anything in her life, nodded sympathetically. Richard Steinberg was good, really good. He'd found a technicality in how I'd accessed Frank's phone, apparently. Looking at an unlocked phone could be considered unauthorized access to electronic devices. He'd turned my documentation into evidence of an obsessive vendetta. He'd even suggested I'd manipulated my elderly grandmother into participating in my scheme. The hearing was set for December 30th. The judge, Harold Feinstein, was known for favoring dramatic reversals. Frank's team had momentum, media sympathy, and a narrative that was starting to stick. That night, I sat with my father's laptop, wondering if I'd played my cards too early, if Frank was about to flip the entire table. December 29th, the day before the hearing, everything changed again. It started with Doug, the reputation management expert, running a PR campaign from your mom's basement. It turns out, has certain limitations, specifically, your mom. Doug's mother, Barbara, recognized Frank from her book club, not her current book club, the one from 15 years ago in Phoenix, where Frank had gone by the name Francis Morrison Walsh and had scammed 6 widows out of their savings before disappearing. Barbara didn't just call the police, she called her entire network of book clubs across 3 states. By noon, 14 different women had come forward with stories about Frank. Different names, same scam. The wounded family man persona evaporated faster than Brittany's modeling career. Then Kelly and Marcus, my former co-workers who'd agreed to testify against me, had a sudden attack of conscience, prompted by the FBI showing up at their doors. Turns out, lying in a federal investigation is still illegal, even if a fancy lawyer asks you to do it. They flipped faster than pancakes at IHOP, admitting Frank had paid them $5,000 each to lie. But the real bombshell came from an unexpected source, Richard Steinberg's paralegal, a quiet woman named Dorothy. She'd been recording everything legally, all state as one-party consent. Frank, not knowing this, had been extremely candid about fabricating evidence, bribing witnesses, and his plans to flee to Costa Rica once he got the settlement money. At 8:47 p.m., on December 29th, I received the email I never expected, not from Frank, from my mother. I saw the recordings, I saw the documents, the real ones, from your father. I saw what Frank did to us, what I let him do. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't know if I can forgive myself, but I want you to know, I see you now. I should have always seen you. I'm so sorry, Simona. I'm coming to the hearing tomorrow, not for Frank, for you. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on December 30th. At 8:55 a.m., Frank Morrison sat at the defendant's table, flanked by Richard Steinberg and whatever remained of his dignity. He'd shaved, he'd pressed his suit, he was still trying. Then the courtroom doors opened. My mother walked in first, then my grandmother, leaning on her cane but walking taller than I'd seen her in years, then Jennifer, then Aunt Martha, then Uncle Ted, not recording, just present, then, one by one, 14 women from Barbara's book club network, then Barbara herself, with Doug trailing behind her, looking like a man who'd just realized his mother was more competent than his entire professional operation. The judge looked at the defendant's table, then at the gallery, then back at his paperwork. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "it appears the court has received an unusually high volume of supplemental evidence this morning." Frank didn't answer. He was staring at the gallery, at the women he'd scammed, at the family he'd gaslit, at the daughter he'd pushed down and assumed would never get back up. The judge continued, "I'm also noting the presence of counsel from the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI, and the California Department of Justice. This seems extensive." The federal prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, we would request that these proceedings be stayed pending the impanelment of a federal grand jury." We have reason to believe Mr. Morrison's activities span multiple jurisdictions and involve numerous additional victims. Richard Steinberg's expensive smile had curdled. He was no longer looking at Frank. He was looking at the exit. I watched Frank's face cycle through expressions: confusion, denial, the beginning of comprehension, and finally something I'd never seen on him before. Fear. Not the performative fear of a man caught in a small lie. Real fear. The kind that comes from a decade of consequences arriving all at once. With interest. The judge granted the stay. Frank was remanded into federal custody pending investigation. Richard Steinberg withdrew from representation, citing ethical concerns, which, coming from him, was like a fox citing ethical concerns about chicken coops. Brittany, who had been sitting in the back row wearing sunglasses indoors, tried to slip out unnoticed. She made it to the door before a process server handed her papers related to 3 separate creditor lawsuits. Her scream echoed through the hallway. I walked out of the courthouse at 11:23 a.m. On December 30th, the sky was gray and cold, the kind of December light that makes everything look like an old photograph. My mother was waiting on the steps. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, coat wrapped around herself, looking smaller than I remembered. The woman who once commanded rooms had spent 10 years shrinking. I wondered if she even knew how to stop. Simona, she said, just that, my name, like she was testing whether she still had the right to say it. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready, but I didn't walk away, either. After a long moment, she nodded, turned, walked down the steps and into the gray light. My grandmother appeared beside me, leaning on her cane. She didn't speak for a while. Then, your father would be proud. I thought about that. My father, who built a company from nothing, who set up education funds and wrote passwords in his daughter's birthday, who labeled a folder, if something happens, because he knew, somehow, that something would. He'd be furious I didn't do it sooner, I said. My grandmother made a sound that might have been a laugh. Maybe. She patted my arm. But he'd also be furious you waited this long to get a proper winter coat. Some things are hereditary. It's February now. Frank is awaiting trial on federal fraud charges, plus a lovely assortment of state-level offenses. Brittany's creditors are fighting over her assets, which consist primarily of unpaid credit card bills and a collection of designer handbags she's trying to sell on Poshmark. Her documentary never aired. Chad's YouTube channel pivoted to vintage typewriter restoration and somehow became surprisingly successful. My mother is in therapy. So am I. We haven't spoken since the courthouse steps. I'm not sure if that's healing or just waiting. Some silences, I'm learning, are different from others. Some are the sound of things ending. Some are the sound of things that haven't yet found a way to begin. The company is mine now, properly, legally, with the original will entered into probate and Frank's name scrubbed from every document. My father's chair is back in his office. I sit in it sometimes. It doesn't feel like his anymore. It feels like mine. Uncle Ted's video is still online. Sometimes I watch it, not for the fall, but for what comes after. 23 people sitting in silence, the sound of nothing. I used to think that silence was the worst part. Now I'm not so sure. Because after the silence, I stood up, I walked out, and eventually, 23 people had to decide what kind of silence they wanted to live with. Some of them are still deciding, but me? I'm done with silence. I'm Simona Cunningham. I'm 29 years old, and this is what I know. Rock bottom has a basement, but basements have doors, and doors have handles. You just have to be willing to turn them. Dorothy didn't just quit. She marched into the DA's office with 6 hours of recordings, color-coded transcripts, and what she called her conscience folder, every dirty trick Richard and Frank had planned, documented and time-stamped. Turned out Dorothy's daughter had been scammed by a stepfather, too. She'd been waiting 15 years for exactly this moment. Her hands didn't shake once when she handed over the evidence. Chad, the documentary kid, accidentally became the hero none of us deserved. He'd been live streaming everything, hoping to build buzz for Brittany's redemption arc. Instead, he captured her on camera, mid-eyebrow furrow, admitting she knew her father was guilty but, who cares? We need the money. She also mentioned the side business again, the one Frank had been running out of my father's warehouse. Fake luxury goods, real fraud. Federal jurisdiction. Chad's subscriber count exploded. So did Frank's problems. By evening, Frank was at my door again. No lawyers, no cameras, just him, alone, wearing yesterday's shirt and the kind of desperation that doesn't photograph well. He tried the family card. We can work this out. We're family. I recorded the entire conversation on my phone. Watched his offers escalate like a game show gone wrong. 50,000, 100,000. Then, whatever you want. Just name your price. I named it. Everything you stole, plus interest. My mother arrived while he was still begging. She'd spent the day with grandmother, going through old photos and older documents. What she found made her walk through my door like a woman reclaiming her own spine. Turns out my father had suspected Frank before the cancer even metastasized. He'd hired a private investigator, gathered evidence, built a case, but time ran out before he could use it. Mother had found it all in a safety deposit box, the one she'd forgotten existed. Grief does strange things to memory. Healing does stranger things to forgetting. She played the recording for Frank, his own voice, 10 years ago, bragging to someone about landing the grieving widow jackpot. The look on his face was almost worth everything. Almost. After Frank slinked away and Mother went home to sit with a decade of unspooled lies, I finally opened the folder I'd been avoiding. For my daughter. Open when ready. My father's face appeared on screen, thin from chemo, eyes still bright. Recorded 3 weeks before he died. Sitting in the study I'd been too afraid to enter since his funeral. Simona, he said. His voice was weaker than I remembered, but his words were steel. If you're watching this, it means Frank Morrison has shown his true colors. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you myself, but I've left you the tools. He held up a folder. Everything here is backed up in 3 places. The laptop, a safety deposit box at First National, and with my attorney, Mitchell Reeves, in Denver. What followed was 20 minutes of my father methodically dismantling Frank Morrison. Real name, Franklin Morris Worthington. 20 years of the same con. 7 states. My father had tracked down 11 victims, recorded their testimonies, gathered police reports. Frank wasn't just a con man. He was a predator who specialized in widows with children. But then my father revealed something that made my hands go cold. I didn't confront him because I needed him to think he'd won. A pause. A tired smile. You see, sweetheart, the FBI has been watching Frank for 5 years. Agent Sarah Chen approached me 6 months ago. We've been building a federal case. The video continued. My father explained the trap he'd set with the patience of a man who knew he wouldn't live to see it sprung. The will Frank thought he'd destroyed was a decoy. The real one was filed in Denver, ironclad and unbreakable. The business accounts Frank had access to were honeypots with trackers on every transaction. Even the house sat inside an irrevocable trust set to activate on my 30th birthday, or upon evidence of Frank's fraud, whichever came first. I knew I wouldn't be there to activate it, my father said, tears gathering, but I knew my daughter would be strong enough to finish what I started. I dialed Sarah Chen's number with shaking hands. She answered on the second ring, like she'd been waiting for years. Miss Cunningham, I was wondering when you'd call. Your father said you'd know when the time was right. 3 years undercover, Frank's mistress, his confidant, his accountant, all of it a carefully constructed role. She hadn't been having an affair. She'd been documenting evidence. The side business selling counterfeit goods connected to an international fraud ring the FBI had been tracking for a decade. We were waiting for Frank to make his big move. Agent Chen explained. The lawsuit against you? That's it. He just committed federal wire fraud, witness tampering, and about 15 other felonies. We're moving in tomorrow morning. But my father had left one more gift. A folder labeled, The Network. Contact information for every woman Frank had scammed over 20 years. Barbara from the book club had already found them, already connected them. They'd formed a victims support group, hired a collective attorney, and were preparing a civil suit so massive it would follow Frank into whatever cell he ended up in. The final video was short, recorded the day before my father entered hospice, sitting on my childhood bed, holding the teddy bear he'd given me when I was 5. Simona, 3 things. His voice was barely a whisper now, but his eyes held mine through the screen. 1. I'm proud of who you've become. 2. Your mother will come back to herself. Be patient with her. And 3. He smiled. That mischievous, crooked smile I'd memorized as a child. Frank's biggest mistake was underestimating you. He thinks you're just a sweet compliance officer. He has no idea you got your fighting spirit from both your parents. Give him hell, sweetheart. Then live your beautiful life. He placed the teddy bear on my pillow, whispered, "Justice isn't revenge. It's balance. Restore the balance. My darling girl." The screen went dark. December 30th arrived with a blizzard and a SWAT team. The FBI doesn't believe in sleeping in. At 6 a.m., they hit Frank's apartment. He was in his underwear, mid-reach for his Costa Rica folder. Brittany was screaming about her rights, her reputation, her ruined influencer career. Doug the PR guy was also there, having spent the night crisis managing from Frank's couch. Catastrophically stupid, not criminal. They released him after coffee. The hearing scheduled for that morning transformed into something else entirely. Judge Feinstein, who'd been prepared to hear Frank's lawsuit against me, instead found himself presiding over an emergency asset freeze. The FBI presented their case with the kind of precision that made my compliance-loving heart sing. Agent Chen took the stand. 3 years of undercover work, 2 hours of devastating testimony. She documented everything: the embezzlement, the fraud, the money laundering. And then she revealed what Frank had planned before my father's death, switching his medications, accelerating the timeline. He'd abandoned it only because my father was already dying, and Frank needed him alive long enough to transfer the remaining assets. The courtroom went so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Richard Steinberg tried to withdraw so fast he tripped over his briefcase. The judge wasn't done with him. Dorothy the paralegal had recorded her boss knowingly suborning perjury, coaching witnesses, conspiring to defraud the court. His law license was suspended before lunch. The Bar Association opened an investigation within the hour. The victims' network appeared like an avenging army of pearls and sensible shoes. 14 women, all over 60, all telling the same story with different names and dates. $3 million, 20 years. Frank's signature move was always the same: target the newly widowed, install himself as protector, drain everything, disappear. Except this time, the disappearing didn't work. The IRS agent actually smiled while reading the charges. Tax evasion, tax fraud, filing false returns. The list ran 20 minutes. Frank owed $1.4 million in back taxes, but with penalties and interest, nearly $3 million. They'd frozen everything: bank accounts, investment portfolios, even the quarters in his car's cup holder. My mother took the stand. She validated the trust documents with steady hands and a clear voice. When asked about Frank's character, she didn't flinch. I was grieving. He was hunting. The courtroom held its breath. But the moment that broke Frank completely was Brittany. Faced with her own charges: accessory, fraud, conspiracy. She'd flipped faster than her failed businesses. On the stand, she detailed every scam, every lie, every crime she'd witnessed. And then she produced recordings she'd made of Frank, insurance for the day he inevitably turned on her. The scorpion had stung itself. Jessica Torres, the federal prosecutor, laid out the full scope. This wasn't just fraud. This was racketeering. Frank wasn't a solo act. He was part of a network that targeted widows across the country. The fake luxury goods funded terrorism. The money laundering passed through 6 countries. Frank wasn't facing the kind of jail time reserved for con artists. He was facing the kind reserved for mob bosses. By the end of the day, Frank was denied bail as a flight risk. His passport had already been flagged when he tried to book a ticket to Costa Rica that morning. Every asset was frozen, every exit blocked. The man who'd pushed me down was now falling, and unlike me, no one was reaching out to catch him. New Year's Eve arrived with champagne and vindication. Grandmother declared the old venue tainted by Frank's presence, and nobody argued with grandmother when she used that tone. Her dining room was smaller but warmer, the table set with china that had belonged to her grandmother. The atmosphere was surreal. The same people who'd watched in silence as Frank pushed me were now treating me like a hero. Uncle Ted had become my most vocal supporter, mainly because his video had been optioned for a true crime documentary and he was getting paid. He'd donated half to domestic violence shelters and was using the rest for what he called his apology fund, taking me to very expensive dinners to make up for being an idiot. I let him. He was trying. That counted for something. Jennifer had proven herself a true cousin through everything. She'd spent the week helping other victims file paperwork, working pro bono, because, as she said, watching Frank get destroyed is payment enough. She'd even started dating Agent Chen's partner, David, an FBI accountant who loved spreadsheets as much as she loved justice. Their first date had been a joint forensic audit. They were disgustingly adorable. My mother arrived early to help set up. She'd been in therapy since December 27th, an intensive program for survivors of long-term manipulation. She looked different, not just happier, present, in a way she hadn't been for a decade. She'd started wearing red again, my father's favorite color on her. I need to apologize properly, she said, not to the room, to me. Not for being fooled. Grief makes fools of us all, but for choosing comfort over courage. For letting him dim your light so I wouldn't have to see my own darkness. Her voice held steady. You deserved a mother who fought for you. Instead, you had to fight for both of us. I'm sorry, Simona. I'm going to spend the rest of my life earning the forgiveness you shouldn't have to give. The room went quiet, but it was a different silence than Christmas Eve. This was respect, acknowledgement, the sound of something broken beginning to mend. Grandmother stood, raising her champagne glass. This family failed Simona once. We will not fail her again, and we will not forget that justice came not from us, but despite us. May we earn the forgiveness she's showing us by being here tonight. At midnight, as the ball dropped and everyone kissed and cheered, my phone lit up. The trust had activated. The family business was officially mine. The house was in my name. Every protection my father had put in place, every contingency he'd planned, every trap he'd set, all of it had triggered simultaneously. It was January 1st. New year, new life, new beginning. Frank, meanwhile, spent New Year's Eve in federal detention. Someone sent me a photo from the detention center's celebration. Sparkling apple cider, stale cookies. Frank sat alone in a corner, wearing orange instead of Armani. The man who'd needed to be the center of attention was now inmate number 4,847,329. Brittany had been released on bail but placed under house arrest at a halfway house. Her Instagram dreams had been replaced by court-mandated community service. She'd gotten a job at McDonald's. The uniform did not photograph well. Her captions had shifted from aspirational quotes about manifesting abundance to things like, humble beginnings, character development at last. The documentary producers wanted to interview me. The working title was pushed down. Stand Up, A Christmas Crime Story. They were offering enough money to restart the scholarship fund my father had created before he died. Frank's downfall. Funding other people's dreams. There was a poetry to it I couldn't resist. 6 months later, I sat in my father's office, now truly mine, preparing for Frank's sentencing. The federal case had been swift and decisive. Faced with the evidence, the recordings, the testimony of 14 women and one betrayed daughter, Frank had pled guilty to 47 charges, hoping for leniency. He wouldn't get it. Judge Patricia Hawkins had been one of my father's clients, years ago. She didn't hide her disgust. Frank received 25 years federal time, no possibility of parole for at least 15. The courtroom erupted in applause, highly unusual, but Judge Hawkins allowed it. Sometimes, she said, justice deserves recognition. Brittany received 2 years probation and 3,000 hours of community service. She'd actually become competent at McDonald's, even earning promotion to shift manager. Her Instagram now featured motivational quotes about redemption and photos of herself mopping floors. She sent me a genuine apology note, handwritten, admitting that her father had ruined her too, just in a different way. I didn't forgive her, but I stopped wishing her ill. That felt like progress. The family business hadn't just recovered, it was thriving. The employees, freed from Frank's toxic management, had increased productivity by 40%. We'd won back contracts Frank had lost, gained new ones from the publicity. I'd instituted profit sharing. Everyone was invested in our success, literally. My mother sold the tainted family home. She bought a smaller place near the beach, filled it with light and books and plants. She'd started dating Mitchell Reeves, my father's attorney from Denver, who'd kept the real Will safe all those years. He was nothing like Frank, quiet, kind, secure. He asked my permission before proposing. I gave it gladly. The Victims Network became a formal nonprofit. Barbara from the book club was its president. They'd already helped dozens of women recognize and escape predatory relationships. They'd named it the Simona Foundation. I cried every time I saw the letterhead. Sarah Chen became a friend. The Frank case earned her a promotion and a teaching position at Quantico. She used his file as a textbook example of how greed and narcissism engineer their own destruction. Frank Morrison, 25 years in federal prison, had become a cautionary tale taught to new FBI agents. Uncle Ted had become a minor celebrity. He gave talks about bystander intervention and the importance of helping family members in need. He donated all his speaking fees to domestic violence shelters. With his video royalties, he bought me a car, a beautiful blue Tesla with a license plate that read, "Pushed back." I visited Frank in prison once. Not for closure, not for forgiveness. I had those already, or didn't need them, or had learned they were overrated. I visited to deliver something. I handed him a single photograph, the Christmas dinner table, fully set, my seat prominently displayed with its bronze plaque reading, Simona's Throne. That seat, I told him, was never about hierarchy. It was about family recognizing family. You'll never understand that because you've never been family. You were just a parasite who mistook patience for weakness. He tried to respond, some plea, some justification, some last attempt to spin the narrative. I was already walking away. The guards later told me he stared at that photograph for hours, finally understanding that his one push had cost him everything, while giving me back everything he'd tried to steal. A year after that Christmas dinner, we gathered again for the holidays. The table was fuller than before. Sarah Chen came, and several women from the Victims Network who had nowhere else to go. Mitchell was there, nervously practicing his toast as my mother's new husband. Even Brittany had been invited, though she chose to volunteer at a homeless shelter instead, sending a card so heartfelt I actually kept it. Grandmother, now 86 and sharper than ever, raised her glass. Last year, we learned that silence in the face of injustice makes us complicit. This year, we've learned that redemption is possible for those who seek it, and that justice, while sometimes delayed, is always worth fighting for. Everyone clinked glasses. I thought about my father's words. Justice isn't revenge, it's balance. The balance had been restored. Frank pushed me down in front of 23 silent witnesses. Now he was falling for 25 years in front of the entire world. And this time, no one was silent about what he deserved. They say you should be careful who you push down. They might know how to get back up. But Frank learned a harder lesson. Be careful who you push down at Christmas dinner. They might have a dead father who planned for this exact moment, an FBI agent for a pretend mistress, a grandmother who documented your crimes while pretending to be confused about her iPhone, and 23 witnesses who, eventually, remembered how to speak. The price of one push? Everything Frank had schemed for, stolen, and built on lies, all of it came crashing down from a single moment of cruelty. He'd thought he was pushing down a weak stepdaughter. Instead, he'd pushed the first domino in his own destruction. Thank you for listening to my story. Don't forget to subscribe. A new story is coming. It's about a grandmother, a book club, and the 14 women who discovered they were stronger together than any man who ever tried to break them. Turns out Frank wasn't special. He was just the first one stupid enough to get caught. Simona.